And in entrepreneurship, when about 20 years ago, when I first started, a little bit before I first started, that was how we thought about entrepreneurial opportunities, that the opportunities were there. This work goes back to Kersner. I noticed we have some NYU people. I'm sure she's your colleague over there. And basically, the notion of these discovery opportunities, as they've come to be called, is all opportunities, market opportunities, are competitive imperfections in product or factor markets. And in the discovery view, they exist independent of human action or perception. Let me go on to explain that. These opportunities, as the discovery view suggests, are formed by exogenous shocks. These shocks are changes in technology, consumer preferences, political, regulatory, and so forth, demographics, this type of thing. And since these opportunities exist independent of human action or human perception for that matter, they're kind of out there. I think of them as balloons of sorts, right? Then Kersner insists that you have to have these special alert individuals. There's something special about these people in order for them to see these opportunities. And the decision-making context, because these special alert individuals can also estimate their opportunity costs, if you will, so the decision-making context is a risky context. Now, this has something to tell us about the kind of rents that these opportunities would happen to yield, right? And so the rents that these opportunities would yield are arbitrage rents, returns to alertness. And once this alertness becomes known, once these rents become known, once the information asymmetry is conveyed, then it becomes very easy for others, if you will, to come in and imitate these types of opportunities. Really quickly, and I don't think I need to go into this very much for this crowd, but we do make, I've just talked about risk, I do make the distinction between a risky decision-making context and an uncertain one. We use the typical Knightian, definition, so we don't vary from that, and use the example of rolling the die, if you will. I'm going to gloss over that because I think I'm speaking to a fairly sophisticated audience here. Kersner's example of these discovery opportunities, though, really quickly, it's his famous example. He uses tin in Bolivia, and basically as it goes, tin in Bolivia is worth 10 cents a pound. Somewhere in the United States, it's worth $10 a pound. The alert entrepreneur sees the difference, these price differences, and of course brings tin into the U.S. where he or she can sell it, typically he, in these old days, can sell it for more money than what they get it. So the alert entrepreneur sees this price opportunity, if you will. So how do you search? How can you search? Even though Kersner actually rather goes on to say you don't need a lot of search, but he does talk about the possibility of search, and Schumpeter, who I'm going to talk about in a little bit later, also talks about search a little bit more. But again, because these are information asymmetries, right, conditions of risk, you can use traditional profit maximizing tools, you can use focus groups, industry reports, NPV analysis, all kinds of different types of search, if you will. And once the entrepreneur can explain these information asymmetries, they can go to the bank. Right, so the entrepreneur can go to the bank because this is pretty straightforward. They can use their receivables from customers. They might be able to get customers early on. There's lots of things they can do, but the important thing is that they probably can get some kind of funding given the information once they convey the information asymmetries. So again, these are Kersian rents. And all entrepreneurs need some kind of isolating mechanism, if you will, because once these rents are known, they've put in all this work, all this effort, so they want to do something so that they can prolong, right? So there's the rent creation portion, but then there's also the rent appropriation portion, and entrepreneurs would like to appropriate some of these rents as well. So we talk about the isolating mechanisms that these entrepreneurs potentially can use, and that is, these are information asymmetries. They're exploiting them. They want to try and keep them secret, if you will, for as long as possible. And then there's first mover advantages. Appropriate as much of that rent as you can, as quickly as you can. Schumpeter, and I won't elaborate too much on Schumpeter. I actually think Schumpeter, Kersner said this, and I think he's probably right, is sort of a special example of this. Now, Schumpeter was actually very interesting in that he was very contradictory in much of his work, and the more you read it, the more the contradictions come up. But Schumpeter basically talked about these opportunities and these rents as being within a large company. And it's more returns to innovation. And you see the people that do corporate innovation, they evoke Schumpeter's name a lot. And so again, we've got objective returns to resource recombinations. In the case of Kerzner, it tends to be exogenous. In the case of Schumpeter, it tends to be more endogenous, if you will. But again, our entrepreneurs, they have deep knowledge of a company's processes, products, resources. Once again, the decision-making context is risky, and immutability, and Schumpeter comes right out. The one thing he's very clear is that these are transient rents, if you will, quasi-rents, and they are competed away in equilibrium. So again, what are the isolating mechanisms that we see that are very common to these types of rents? And on isolating mechanisms, there's many more than I'm probably even going. I'm just trying to get the more common ones. We're looking at things like information asymmetries, first mover advantages, response lags, right? So again, because hopefully the opportunity that's being exploited is embedded in the company. No two companies are the same, so there might be a bit of a response lag. They can use patents, that type of thing. But actually in the early 2000s, late 1999, 98, early 2000s, there started to become a group of people in entrepreneurship that were really unhappy with the explanation I just gave you, with kind of the Kerznerian opportunities and the Kerznerian rents and the Schumpeterian rents. And so instead of thinking about entrepreneurial opportunities in the way of mountains to go out and be discovered, there became a movement in the field of entrepreneurship where we begin to think of opportunities not as opportunities to be discovered like lost luggage, if you will, but opportunities to be created. And this has become the creation view of opportunities, and I want to give you a bit of an example how that works in practice. Many of you may know this is the Ice Hotel, and you may or may not know the story behind the Ice Hotel, but let me tell you a little bit about this story. So the founder of the Ice Hotel is an environmental engineer. That's his training, and he was working for a mining company. And he was very unhappy with his job, not surprisingly, right? And so in the summers, he would go out and he would, do groups. This is in Sweden. He'd do groups that would go fishing, and they would go, hiking, and just love this. And he actually started doing this, and he started making a fair amount of money during the summer. And so he thought to himself, if I could figure out something to do in Sweden, which goes to show you how overconfident and optimistic he is, in Sweden in the winter, if I could figure out how to do this, I then could potentially make enough money that I could quit that mining job, right? That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to quit this mining job. So he's looking around because he's buying into this notion that opportunities are out there. He just has to be alert enough and find one of those opportunities out there, right? And so he's looking and he's thinking and he's, searching for this opportunity, if you will. And he happens to be in Tokyo. And in Tokyo, he goes to this beautiful exhibit of ice sculptures. And he's like, aha, this is it. I'm going to talk to all these artists, and we're going to bring these ice sculptures back to Sweden in the winter. We're going to have an outdoor ice sculpture exhibit. And so he talks to the artists, and the artists are excited, and he gets them all to come with him to Sweden in the winter. They build their ice sculptures, and the unthinkable happens. They have a warm day in Sweden, and it rains, and the ice sculptures melt. And this poor guy is just dejected, because he's thinking, I have to go back out and search for those opportunities again, right? And so the artists come to him, and they're feeling really bad for him because he's just like devastated. And they're like, not so quick. We built igloos and actually slept in these igloos. And the igloos didn't melt. what if next year, and they have to wait till next year, what if next year we build a big igloo and put the ice sculptures inside the big igloo? So they make this plan, they do this, they build a big igloo, they put the ice sculptures in there. Again, they sell tickets, people come, and they really enjoy the ice sculptures in the big igloo. But one of the things that they say is, you know, we thought it was kind of cool. We've been watching those artists sleeping in those little igloos. Maybe next year you could make enough igloos that we could sleep in the igloos too. So they went next year and they had the ice sculpture exhibits and they had the igloos. And people started sleeping in the igloos. And that became the Ice Hotel. And the Ice Hotel roughly costs about $2,000 a night, the last time I checked. And it's about 2 years. I can't get a dean to pay for it, right? So I'm like, why keep checking? But, you know, about $2,000 a night, and it's about a 2-year wait, right? And for this money, you get the privilege of sleeping on a slab of ice in an ice room, and you cover up with deer pelts, right? So that's what you do at the Ice Hotel. And if you're at the Ice Hotel and you're sleeping on a slab of ice and you're covered with deer pelts, what do you need? You need a good drink of vodka, right? So the ice bar was born from sleeping on the deer pelts. And interestingly enough, they serve Absolute vodka. And I've heard this, I don't know if it's an urban myth or not, but I've heard that the Ice Hotel wanted to partner with Absolute Vodka. And Absolute Vodka sort of looked at them, the development group, and said, why would we want to partner with you? And they thought, well, we're going to do this anyhow. And someone came that was a little bit higher up and thought this was a great idea and commended the business development group for being so wise as to sell Absolute Vodka at the Ice Hotel. So you can get a drink of Absolute Vodka. You can only stay in the ice bar is 30 minutes because after that it becomes too cold. Right? So you've got this whole Ice Hotel and the process of the Ice Hotel. So the thing that's important about this, about the story of the Ice Hotel, is that no matter how many focus groups, no matter how much watching they did, no matter how many times they ran the data, the Hilton, the Hyatt, the Sheraton, the Marriott, right, et cetera, none of them would have discovered the Ice Hotel, right? So this was something that had to be created through the iterative actions of someone who actually became an entrepreneur, wasn't an entrepreneur ex ante, became an entrepreneur through these actions. So let's talk about the creation opportunities. So again, they're competitive imperfections, just like the discovery opportunities in product or factor markets. The difference is they do not exist independent of human action, but exist because of human action, right? And the individuals may or may not differ, but as they go through this process, they certainly are different by the time they come out of the process. And the decision making takes place in an uncertain context because the outcome is uncertain. You cannot sit there and estimate your opportunity costs. You can't estimate the affordable loss, as many people say, so you can't estimate the damn thing. So let's talk about Knightian uncertainty really quickly, and we've talked about it, and we've talked about the definition, right? Unknown outcomes, unknown probabilities. But the thing that's so interesting at the human level is, there's things we know we don't know, and everybody's kind of okay with that, right? We're big boys and girls. We've kind of started to accept that. Right? There's things we don't know that we don't know, and we're even okay with that. That makes us a little more uncomfortable, but we're okay with that. But the really tricky thing is there's things we think we know that we don't know, and oftentimes that's around demand, right? So if you think about Uber and looking at the taxi cab industry, if they had taken demand as given and said, okay, this is what it's like, we wouldn't have Uber today, right? So if you look at the Ice Hotel, and if Marriott had sat there and planned about what their ideal hotel would be, they wouldn't assume that demand was about sleeping on a slab of ice covered with deer pelts. So these are things that are worth keeping in mind, right? So how do we understand this uncertain creation process, if we will? Well, there's some things that we're starting to learn, and there's things that we know. which is that not all alternatives, consequences, and probabilities are known at the time an individual acts. That doesn't seem so radical, does it, when you put it that way, right? All of us act, and 6 actions out, we don't know where we're at necessarily. Individual actions and reactions, while they may create more certainty, they also may create more uncertainty, right? So you just don't know. More information, time to analyze, and computation isn't always better. You kind of have to go out there and start acting. The use of biases and heuristics is very common. Use your gut. Someone told me, what does that mean, use your gut? But anyhow, to make decisions. And numerous small experiments to create knowledge and information. Right? These are ways to begin to deal with this uncertain process. Now there's some implications for this, right? So designing experiments under uncertainty, and we've talked about that quite a bit here, but it can both improve and degrade your decision making. Because the problem is, if you're truly under uncertainty and you try A and you get B or you get C, then you begin to ask yourself why. Because there's no data to support you, there's no right or wrong answer. So now what you have to begin to think about is, well, what's the next experiment we're going to design, given that we don't understand the outcome of the first experiment. And so you probably have quite a bit of this. You know, Steve Jobs, I love the Steve Jobs saying, you can't ask customers because they don't know. Right? Previous to the ice hotel, if I had come in here and said to all of you, who wants to sleep on ice, you know, covered in dildo pelts and pay $2,000 for that privilege, several of you would have looked at me like you've got to be absolutely insane. And prone to bias, right? So all these little experiments, all these things that we're doing, they're highly prone to bias. But the solution is you keep experimenting. And I hate the current saying in the field of entrepreneurship. You've all probably heard it. It's like fail fast, fail often. I mean, what is failure if you're learning? If you're learning, you're not failing. You're learning. And that's different. And you may choose to pivot, and you may choose to reinterpret, and you may choose a lot of different things. But failure isn't really a helpful word. That's a word that's rooted in kind of this risky situation, if you will. And you experiment cheap, not at scale. You experiment cheap, unless you're in a horrible crisis such as the 2007, 2008 crisis, in which case you have no choice but to experiment big. So let's talk about the isolating mechanisms around here. And the isolating mechanisms are different, right? I'm going to say that these types of opportunities are inimitable. And they're inimitable because of their history, because of the numerous small decisions, and because of the socially complex resources, which means people that are used in these particular, to develop these opportunities. So history, the skills, abilities, resources that are developed and learned over time as the firm evolves. So in the case of the ice hotel, we saw how they changed. The other thing that's worth noting is it melts every year. So every year they build it, it melts, and they have to go back and plan and rebuild for the next year. So who likes that idea for a hotel? And the unique experiences that through history give the firm, you know, its particular capabilities, its resources and capabilities that exist only in that firm. The numerous small decisions, I've talked about that a little bit already, but you get cumulative consequences, right? That you can observe sometimes the consequences, but it's hard to understand how all those little decisions added up over time. And oftentimes, even the managers within a firm may not understand what those decisions look like, and may not understand how they got to where they're at. The socially complex resources, again, we talk about things like reputation, trust, friendship, right? How do those things get built? Right? They don't just like come and exist, like the fairy doesn't just come and bring them one day, right? These things get built over time. And if you have this creation process where humans are acting and interacting with each other, you're likely to see some of these important relationships build. And again, they're path dependent in ways that are unique to that particular firm. So in the creation view, the exogenous shocks that are given in the discovery view are created by the entrepreneurs in the creation view. Right? So implications for research. It may require a different philosophical lens. than other business disciplines, most of which are built on economics, by the way, right? Such as accounting, finance. This type of entrepreneurship, understanding how entrepreneurial opportunities are created, understanding the creation process, may require a different philosophical lens. It's, critical realism, which is the thing of unobservables, that they really exist but they're not observed, versus maybe an evolutionary realism or a social construction with some kind of boundaries, right? The emphasis, let's go back and think about origins some more. Right? This is all I ever do. This is what I do in my line of business. But what are kind of the origins, the emergence? What does that tell us about where we're at and where we're going? Some policy recommendations, and actually I've thought of even bigger policy recommendations listening to all of you, which is fascinating, which is great for me, right? So regulation may be beneficial if your rents are Knightian or Schumpeterian. They may or may not be. But one of the things that I suspect is that they're not beneficial, right? They may not be beneficial when the rents associated with the firm are Knightian uncertainty rents. And that's because as you begin to think about what disrupts those kinds of rents, I don't think they're competed away in the same way because of the different isolating mechanisms. And so if they're not competed in the same way as like a Knightian rent, then regulation may not work because competition, so we look at Starbucks. I was actually going to start today's talk with Starbucks because it fascinates me. As much competition, and it's coffee, right? I mean, we're not talking technological sophistication, but as much competition as many different kinds of firms that have tried to imitate Starbucks, and yet here's Starbucks. They have certainly created more rents than they've been able to appropriate, I think, and I suspect that the only thing that's going to displace Starbucks is going to be an other rent-creating type of opportunity. And so that begins to tell you something. And regulation in this situation where you have these uncertainty rents may discourage new entrants, right? And actually solidify the incumbent. And it was fascinating. I don't know how many of you were able to watch the congressional meetings for Facebook, but I watched Mark Zuckerberg testify in front of Congress. And I was watching him, and you could see kind of he has this deadpan face until Congress starts talking about regulations. And at that point, he's like, oh, we'll do whatever you need, we'll help you out, whatever, right? And the reason being because he's thinking, score, we're going to make a killing off of this, right? Because we're going to keep out the competition. And so what Congress should maybe have been thinking about is, what can we do to help encourage other disruptions to Starbucks, or to Facebook, if you will, as opposed to maybe trying to regulate it per se. And again, that's kind of this notion of another product or service may destroy, right? And that actually has huge implications, because if what you're looking at is big creation types of rents that are doing well and are difficult to compete away, then you have all kinds of things like labor that are attached to this particular type of product opportunity. And what happens now when something else comes in that is competency and resource destroying, if you will, that destroys what's going on? And we're kind of seeing this with Uber a bit, right? So Uber displaced a lot of the taxi cab drivers, and now we've got Uber, and now we're going to have autonomous cars. And so what happens to the resources and capabilities that are being used in big amounts? That's a technical term, big amounts. But what happens to these resources and capabilities once something comes in and makes them irrelevant? I don't know, but these are certainly things that we can begin to think about. And with that, thank you very much. I appreciate it.